Hey you folks, Quilly here, and welcome to a brand new Unity tutorial. Today we're going to be looking at the user interface system in Unity, and specifically we're going to look at implementing a drag and drop system. I'm sure many of you may have looked into doing some sort of drag and drop interface and realize there's not really a built-in solution for that into Unity, and you might have thought that was a bit odd. But the reason for that is there's not really a one-size-fits-all drag and drop behavior that applies to every game in general. For example, this is the Unity user interface like sample project that you can grab that includes a few different demos, including drag and drop. And here is a interpretation of what drag and drop could work like. So in this is the demo put out by Unity itself. You've got three icons over here. You've got two drop areas. If you click and drag on one of these icons, it grabs a copy of the icon here and gives you the ability to drop it onto an area. You can see it mouses over, it glows, and when I drop, it just replaces that picture. There's no sort of grabbing back out of there, and you can just keep replacing the images all day long. And I mean, that is drag and drop, and I guess it's a demo. It also showcases some cool sort of the fact that these surfaces are tilted. You know, it's angling the icon. That's, you know, so it's a pretty interesting demo of that. But that's not what a lot of people necessarily may think of for drag and drop, at least not for your game. But there's all kinds of different interpretations. In a role-playing game, so it's something like Diablo, you might imagine this to be your inventory, and this could be something like your weapon slots. You might be taking a sword from out of your inventory and putting it there, in which case you'd imagine it as physically moving the object from point A to point B. Something like Hearthstone, which I have over here, it's a card game that's put out by Blizzard. It involves some dragging and dropping, although there's multiple different interpretations of that. Here we've got our hand over here. I can grab one of these minions like a shield bearer. I can pull it around. I'm sort of physically moving it, and then I can put it on the table, and I can choose where I'm going to put it in my row of minions. Now, minions work this way, but spells don't necessarily do that. With a spell, when you grab it, if I'm assuming I'm remembering correctly, it's been a while since I've played a lot of Hearthstone. If this were a spell card that maybe did 2 damage to something, if I were to drag it out, I wouldn't be physically dragging the card. Instead, I would be dragging a line like an arrow to my target. And so that's an example of a different interpretation of what drag and drop can look like within the same game. For example, you get some different behaviors. And yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to implement something that's not unlike this sort of card game like Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering type of card game. With the caveat that as we go along, I'm also going to tell you everything you need to know to also make like an RPG style drag and drop system. In fact, the thing we're going to end up making is going to look, if I can pull up my other project here. Just bring it over this way. We've got card test asset scene. Open this. Let it reload. We'll close that. Just takes a moment. Actually, really surprised it's taking so long. It's not a very complicated project. There we go, computer. You can do it. I have faith. There we are. Let's hit play. So this is a demo we're basically going to end up doing. We may not do this card drawing mechanic. We've got some cards. Unlike in Hearthstone, I can actually reorder my cards in my little demo here, and then I can drop things onto the table like that. And you can see here, I can put it there, or I can put it back down here. It's got the placeholder. With my implementation I've got here, these are still draggable, so I can keep moving them around if I want. Heck, I can even pick them up into my hand if I want, which is my current implementation here. But there we go. So this is sort of drag and drop we can do. And again, while this is not an RPG inventory implementation, it should be very easy for you to imagine that this is our inventory, and then instead of one giant dropping area here, where things can be ordered and added to, instead we'd have a series of individual little drop areas, each one of which can only have one thing. So, for example, if I'm currently wielding like an axe here, and I grab my sword card, and this is supposed to be my weapon thing, instead of, allowing me to have both, instead by mousing over and dropping what it does, the old one would then go back into my inventory and replace it that way. We'll also talk about the concept of filtering, for example, the idea that you can't put boots in your sword hand, for example, and how we might want to do that. But yeah, so this is the demo we're going to do. It should be relatively straightforward, I think. And let's go ahead and get ourselves started. Okay, so we're ready to set up our new project, but before I do, I want to address the fact that I am running this in Unity 5. I believe if you're still running on Unity 4.6, everything I do in here should work and should be exactly the same. If anything, for any reason, doesn't work out quite well, make sure you're running the exact same version that I am. I will also note that I'm running the professional version, the paid version of Unity. However, everything we do here should work perfectly fine in the free version. There's no reason that it shouldn't. As usual, keep track of where you've actually saved your project so that you can find it later if you want to copy in some images or anything like that. You can name your project whatever you want. I've gone ahead and named it Unity Drag and Drop Tutorial. Doesn't matter if you set up your project defaults for 3D or 2D. The only thing this does is affect how your images get imported by default, whether they're set up as textures or sprites, which is fine. You can still change them. It also changes how your default scene editor view is set up. But again, that's it's one button to click in there. So I'll leave it on 3D for the sake of argument. We're going to go ahead and create the project. I'm super excited for Let 'em Dare 32. I don't know when you're watching this video, but at this time, we're about a month away from the next Let 'em Dare. Okay, and so here's the scene. This is usually the way I like to keep things set up. And we're going to talk about a few UI basics, a few concepts to get started. But this is not going to be just a purely UI-centric tutorial. We're mostly going to focus on drag and drop and not go into details about absolutely everything. So to get started, we are going to need a canvas. Every UI in your Unity project exists within a canvas. I will note that there's lots of ways to do drag and drop. You can do drag and drop stuff with 3D objects and all kinds of things. We are specifically using the Unity GUI drag and drop type of thing for this particular tutorial. So we're going to go and create the canvas. We can use either this game menu here, or we can create from here. It doesn't make a difference which one we use. We're going to then go UI, and we're going to create a canvas. Now, it's worth noting if you create any other UI element, a canvas and an event system automatically get added to the game. But we'll go ahead and put in the canvas to start off with. Thing to note about the canvas, this is automatically sized to be the same size as your view over here. Note that that tends to mean that it's quite big. If I go ahead and create, say, a cube, all right, we got a cube in here. So the cube by default is, it's got a scale of 1, 1, 1, but I think it's effectively 2 units in every direction. So it's like 1 unit from the center of the cube to each edge, for example, right? So that's basically a 2 by 2 by 2 box. However, my canvas, if I double click on it in my hierarchy, we'll see, we'll zoom out so far, I can't even see the cube anymore. And that's because the canvas, the width and height of it is exactly equal to the width and height of your actual game view. If I go ahead and, so note that our height is 512 right now. If I go ahead and make this bigger, like this, and it doesn't update in real time for whatever reason. You have to sort of click here or just toggle on and off. You can see my height was 512, now it's 612, or I can shrink it way down. And again, click just to cause it to refresh. It's now 183. Right now I have it locked to a 16 by 9 aspect ratio, but you can also go free aspect, which is the default actually. And every time we do this, you can see that the size of the canvas actually changes, and you can see it in the editor. If I bring it way down to be skinny like this, you can see it actually did become very skinny. And if I bring it very tall, you can see that, and if I make it really narrow, you can see this. So the canvas adjusts itself in real time. The reason it's doing that is because by default, the canvas is on the screen space overlay mode, which means it's mapped to the size of the screen. Another option, which seems almost completely identical, is the screen space camera mode, which will basically do the same thing, with a few caveats. We're not getting into those. And then there's world space, which is quite a bit different, and it's where it exists in the actual world itself. If we do this, now we have the option of doing all kinds of weird rotation and stuff, and it's good for maybe having a pop-up that hovers over a character in the game. We're going to talk about those a little bit more later on. But mostly we're going to be working with the screen space overlay. We're also going to make an adjustment to the canvas scaler later on, but for now we're going to leave everything as is. Let me get rid of the cube. We have no interest in having that cube in there. But what we do want to do is we want to make a card. We're going to be dragging around things that look like playing cards. Again, sort of a Hearthstone, Magic the Gathering-ish kind of thing. So on the canvas over here, I'm going to right-click on it and say UI. And we're going to add in an image. You could also, in the hierarchy, go ahead, as long as your canvas is selected, I think you can go create UI image. Worth noting, panel and image are effectively exactly the same thing. They just are set up with slightly different defaults as to their anchoring. For our purposes, it'll make more sense to just use an image. So now at this point, we can see a few things. Again, this canvas sort of exists in 3D space. But here, it's completely flat and two-dimensional. It's really worth noting, if we took our camera over here, and we moved it. We're going to move the camera. We're going to rotate the camera around. I mean, the background is sort of changing. You can see the sky and everything. Everything is changing, but the UI is untouched. And that's because, again, the canvas is in screen space overlay mode. If I went to world space, then all of a sudden we would lose track of things. I don't even know if it'd be possible for us to actually find the object, not unless we adjusted things pretty dramatically because of where the placement is. If it's in world space, then the object actually exists in the physical world, and you have to make sure that you're actually pointing at it correctly. So if I take this camera, there we go, and move it back, now the camera is either looking at the canvas or it isn't, right? And its position actually matters quite a bit. But as soon as we go back to our canvas simply being an overlay on the screen, it's painted directly on the screen. That's what we're going to use mostly. But again, we'll talk about the other one a little bit more later on. It's also worth noting here that in the scene view, it's not very convenient to work on your UI in 3D mode like this. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the 2D toggle button right up over here. And this is basically, if you set up a 2D project, this is exactly the sort of interface you'd be used to, but you can always toggle back and forth between the two. So now that we've got it in this mode, my scene editor looks pretty reasonable next to my view down here. So this image here, we're going to rename it to, say, card. Obviously, it doesn't look like much of a card right now. I'm going to make a couple little tweaks. First of all, the source image, I'm going to hit the little targeting icon. We're going to use the UI sprite source image, which just gives us little rounded corners, which is going to be, in my opinion, a little bit better. And we'll change the height to something like, I don't know, if we change it to something like 200, and let's increase the width until it looks kind of reasonable for a card. Maybe something like this. Tell you what, we'll call this 125. Okay, 200 pixels tall by 125 wide. That looks kind of card-like. Let's go ahead and add a little bit more decoration to this card. We don't need it, but let's make it look a little bit more like what you might expect from, say, a Magic the Gathering playing card. So I'll add another image inside of the card. I'm going to color this one to be black. And this is sort of going to represent where the actual picture of the card might be. Let's go ahead and just make it a little bit wider. Let's call it 110 by 110. We'll keep it square, and then I'm just going to move it upwards a little bit. I'm just using the rect transform over here so that it's a little bit easier to position. We're going to add in some text. This is going to be card title. So we're calling this, I don't know, we'll call it the Black Lotus. There we go, one of the coolest Magic cards there is. Now, I can keep positioning this manually, but the other thing I can do is I can use the little anchor preset tool over here, which is very handy, especially if you hold Alt or Shift or both to force the object to go where I want it to go. Maybe I want it to stick to the top and be stretched from left to right. There we go, like that. And then I can change maybe the bottom part over here, just to make sure it'll never overlap things. And, oh, I called it Black Lotus here. That's not what I want. I want this to be something like card title. And in here, Black Lotus. There we are. That's relatively fine. Tell you what, let's tweak this a little bit more. Let's, there we go. And then bring it up a little bit further. There, I think that's relatively decent. And then we need a little box maybe for description. UI. Text. I'm going to go ahead and holding Alt and Shift, I'm going to stick it to the bottom. I'm going to make sure to embiggen it a little bit more this way. And we're going to say, so this is going to be the description, card description. None of this is important. It's just, you know, looks better. This is a super powerful, awesome card that makes you win. And then we can adjust the font. One of the cool things you can do is turn on best fit mode. And then you give it a range of font sizes, yeah, from like 6 to 40. And it'll automatically scale the font to fit that appropriately, depending on how much is in there. So, woo! Right, it's big. This is smaller. If I kept typing, then it would keep shrinking. It's a neat little trick. Maybe not appropriate for this. Sometimes you just want a fixed font size and you'll work things. Clearly, this a card title, or the card image is a little bit too big. But you know what? We're going to call that one good enough. So now we have this card, and we're going to want to be able to drag this card around. Actually, what I'm going to do, because it's just going to annoy me, none of this is important, but it's kind of driving me bonkers. There we go. That it was being clipped just a bit. Same thing with the card description. God, none of this matters. Why am I even doing this? Because I have to. All right, there. There's our card. So we want to make this card to be draggable. So there's nothing you can just necessarily turn on to make a card draggable. It will need a script because, again, what does dragging and dropping mean? It depends on the game. So we are going to need a script. I'm going to create a new C# script, and I'm going to call it draggable. Okay? So we're going to put this on any object that's supposed to be draggable. In this case, the card should be draggable. Okay, so this is going to have some sort of functions that do things, but it's also going to need to receive messages from the user interface system to find out that, like, hey, the user is trying to drag, because that concept is in the game. If I click and drag, like Unity already knows if you click on something, if you're pressing down, it's got events for that. Events, that's an important word. And if you're holding it down and you pull your mouse to the side, that will initiate something called a drag. And again, events exist for this too. What you could do, so there's, as in everything with all programming, especially Unity or including Unity, there's multiple ways of doing it. What we could do on our object, we can put in something called an event trigger. We can add a new event type, and we can say, look at this, drag. Right? Drag, drop. Well, that's it. We want an event when a drag has started, we want to do something about that. And what you can do is you can add something that listens for this event, drag in some sort of object, so maybe the card itself, and then call a script on one of the, or call a function on one of the scripts. So every time a drag starts, we'd call one, we'd add a new event type for drop, we'd register the card here and call a different function. That can work. However, I find this to be a little bit tedious. Also, I tend to forget. I'll create a new object that's supposed to be drag and droppable. And I might put the draggable script on there, but maybe I'll forget to wire up all the triggers, for example. So rather than use this, I'm going to do it in scripting. I actually want to remove this component. So we're not going to use the event trigger component. We just got the basic card with the image on it and the draggable script. And in this script, we are going to tell Unity that we want to listen to that event. I'm going to go ahead and just save the scene here. Boom, boom, boom. I'm just going to call it, this is what I usually do. Makes it nice and stand out over here. I'm going to just call it default scene. That way I can keep hitting Control S to save. We're going to double click on draggable to open it up. Hopefully I didn't have any old scripts open in MonoDevelop over here. There we go. All right. So here is our script. Let me go ahead and embiggen this so it's a little easier to read. So by default, there's a start and an update function. We don't think we're going to need either one of these. So what we want is, we want to know when we start dragging it. Again, what we could do is if we had a public void on drag function, like this, for example, we could call it from that event trigger system. However, there's a slightly different way of doing it. If we register ourselves to use Unity engine dot event systems. If we include this, then there's a couple of interfaces that we can say that we are that we will implement on this particular object. So what do I mean by that? Well, let me get my reference open on the other side so I don't lie to you about some of the text. Unfortunately, I don't like things that you have to memorize, and this is sort of one that you sort of have to. And it's a concept that might be a little bit weird if you're not used to certain types of object-oriented programming. But draggable here is it's descending, is inheriting from mono behavior. It is a mono behavior. It's a specific type of mono behavior that is a draggable. But we can also bring in some new functions. So instead of specifying, hey, void on drag, and then wiring it up through the inspector, what we can do is we can register this and say this implements the interface of begin drag handler. You need to include the event systems in here, otherwise Unity won't know what the heck this is. But this is a function. This interface makes a promise to the system. It says, I promise that if you send me a certain set of functions, if you try to call a certain set of functions, that function will exist on here. If I just say this promise here, and I then go back over here, we will get an error in our console. Draggable does not implement interface member, There's a function here called onBeginDrag that is expected. If I'm promising to implement the interface begin_drag handler, I'm promising that there will be a function called onBeginDrag. Okay, but that's fine. We want to know when we start dragging. So let's go ahead and say, all right, so there's a function called onBeginDrag, and it requires, based on this, it needs to accept a pointer event data. Okay, pointer event data, and we'll call it, I don't know, data. Doesn't really matter what we really call it here. Or maybe, tell you what, event data. That's probably a little bit better. Okay, so now we're promising that there's a function called this. That error should now go away. Unless there's... Is it supposed to return something? Hang on. Let's right-click on IBegin drag handler. Check the declaration. void on begin drag. Did I spell it wrong? No, everything is fine. It's not supposed to be public, is it? I bet you it is. Because it's an interface. There it is. Public interface. Yeah, all right. So it has to be a public function. Good to know. Let's go ahead and put in a debug.log on begin drag. And we're going to verify that we're actually getting this message. So we're going to hit play. So, I don't want to maximize anymore. Now, if I just click on the Black Lotus, nothing happens. But if I click and hold and then move to the side, still nothing is happening. Why is that? It should be. On begin drag handler. Let's go ahead and implement the rest here. Drag handler, because we also want, we don't want to know just when we begin to drag. We want to know while things are being dragged. And we'll also want to know when things stop being dragged. So we need an on end drag handler. So these are all public void on drag with the same parameters here. Just make an empty function. And another one when we got on end drag with the same things, and we'll go ahead and put in a debug log on all of these. Still. Oh, that's interesting. How come the on begin drag wasn't triggering before? Oh! Okay. It's only draggable. It only responds to any of these, apparently. See, I was trying to break it down into baby steps, and unfortunately I made things more confusing than it should have been. It's only draggable with this. We don't need anything else. I could actually get rid of everything else, right? All you need, if you respond to the on drag handler, then that is enough for the system to be like, okay, this is something that's draggable, and start firing events. But then if you also respond to the start and end drag, then it will fire additional events at the very start of the drag and the very end of the drag. But apparently, if I remove the drag handler, I don't think either one of the other two will fire. That's interesting. Look at that. Huh. So if you don't respond to drag itself, it doesn't respond to the start and end of it. I mean, I guess that makes sense. I mean, you almost always use these together. Or at the very least, you'll use just the drag handler. I guess there's never going to be a reason you would only use the begin and end and not care about the middle. All right, so we're clearly getting events now. That's the important part, right? We now know when the system says this card has started to be dragged and is being dragged, and as soon as you let go, you get an on-end drag. That's good. Okay. So now what do you do with these events, with these information? Well, your on drag can be as simple. Well, again, here it comes down to what does it mean to be dragged? Let's assume we want to physically move the card at this point. How would we do that? Well, it's actually not that hard. All we need to do is use the transform of this object, position. All we want to do is set the position. Event data has a position in it. It's the position of where the mouse is and where all these events are happening. So, oops, we gotta stop and play. So now if I click and I drag, I'm actually moving things around. Note that by default, because my anchor point on my card is in the middle, the way that this is implemented, it's always going to drag sort of the middle of the card there. So if I click on the top and then start to drag, it'll do a little bit of a hop. You can avoid this if in your on begin drag, you take note of what the position is and what the difference between the current position and the mouse position is, and then keep that as a sort of an offset, and then keep that in there. Then you can sort of drag from the top corner if you want to do that sort of thing. We're not going to bother here because we're going to try to keep the script as simple as possible. But now we can drag an object around, and when we let go, well, we're no longer moving it, so it just stops there. Okay, that's great. But obviously, it is only a very small part of the battle. We want to be able to drop it in specific places, maybe. Again, in my little demo there, we are doing basically almost like a card game, right? Where we've got a hand here, and then we've got a droppable place there. You can't just put it anywhere on the screen. We want to have it drop into specific spots. Same thing with sort of an inventory type system. So let's go and look at how to make sort of drop zones in the next video. Thank you very much for watching, folks, and I'll see you next time.